is faithfully waiting for anyone who dares to enter the realm of Koschei. Lie and on
At the edge of the earth, in eternal permafrost, in the deserts and eternal cold, lies the kingdom of Koschei, a dark and evil land, where neither a brave lad nor fair maidens can survive. Only those who show weakness in their human spirit. The dark forces will surely stand in the way of the lost traveler, and a certain death awaits anyone who dares to enter the kingdom of Koschei.
Isn't it interesting? What kind of kingdom is this, and where is it located? The edge of the earth. Eternal cold and ice. Something about all this reminds me of something. Hello, and welcome to the lair. Yes. Many of you have probably heard tales of the evil Koschei, his dark deeds. And the most interesting thing here is the description of the location where all the characters reside. In most cases, this is usually the so-called edge of the earth, eternal, permafrost, cold, and overall a territory promising something bad for an ordinary mortal. Forgive me for such a digression, but all that comes to my mind is our old good, or maybe not so good, Antarctica, ... And if you delve into various ancient scriptures, the description of the world's structure, in particular, the beloved theory of life under the dome in the closed territory, then right there Antarctica serves as sort of ring, edge, call it what you will, which acts as an obstacle on the path of mortal man. Well, try now to freely walk through Antarctica, let alone cross it. Firstly, no one will allow you to do that, except for tourist expeditions under strict control. And secondly, even if you manage to dash to the cold lands as some savage, there is a high probability of you meeting your end from frostbite, falling into some crevasse. Or here it would be good to recall all those scary stories. Tales of voracious creatures who wouldn't mind feasting on another lost polar explorer. By the way, I have several videos on this topic on my channel. For those interested. The link will be in the description. And what kind of Koschei is this? Who has no heart, is immortal, and also lives in such terrible, at least for a human, conditions. Please forgive my free thinking. But here I would also like to put forward my, even to some extent, fairy tale fantastic hypothesis. Yes, I'm often told, storyteller, fantasist, what were you smoking there? But again, brothers, at the entrance to my lair, you are always greeted with a disclaimer, clearly stating that this is only the subjective opinion of the author, and therefore I do not call on anyone, and do not try to assert my words as the truth in the final instances. If you have come in and become interested, it means that I am just sharing my versions with you.
So, Koschei, the cold kingdom and the ends of the earth. As I mentioned earlier, all of this wildly reminds me of our Antarctica. And why not? Right. The ancients who wrote all these tales, fairy tales, they surely knew something. If you have been watching my channel for a while, you probably saw my video where I voiced some interesting information about Antarctica, supposedly being a kind of project to cool down an ancient computer that controls our world. Sounds insane. I know. But living in the 21st century and witnessing so many fantastic phenomena appearing right before our eyes every day. Celestial, atmospheric, terrestrial, aquatic, and so on. I am no longer surprised by anything. So, some insider revealed to the world that Antarctica is a kind of cooling system for our computer called Earth. By the way, this theory fits in very well. Perfectly fits the theory of life in a matrix. In a simulation. Here's your computer. Here are its programs. Here's your cooling. Just like in any respectable computer. Can't do without it. The theory that we live in a computer simulation is more popular today than ever. But, by the way, The idea that our world is a matrix was talked about even by the ancient Greeks, discussing solipsism. Of course, they didn't use the word matrix itself, but described something similar. Philosophers assumed that when they closed their eyes, the whole surrounding world disappeared, for understandable reasons. People considered this hypothesis funny. Even Lenin mocked it. But then video games appeared. The movie The Matrix was released. And gradually people began to realize this shocking enlightenment. But then video games appeared. The movie The Matrix was released. And gradually people began to comprehend this shocking enlightenment. The meaning of the Matrix is clear to everyone. But how does it work? Obviously, processors needed to create such a massive simulation. A very powerful processor that needs constant cooling. Each of us has a humming box under the table, inside of which a little stone is working, constantly heating up and requiring cooling, thermal paste, a water cooler. But more on that later. So what's the deal? Recently, director Benjamin Fulford made a very interesting statement. He received information from a high-ranking insider who revealed that our world is controlled by an ancient artificial intelligence. The UFOs that people constantly observe turn out to be just peripherals responsible for repairing various objects within the system. He also mentioned that there are people who have been trying to resist artificial intelligence since ancient times. Quoting, "Our ancestors learned about its existence centuries ago. It was a mistake for them, and an unacceptable event for artificial intelligence. In the end, he had to destroy the previous version of the world through a catastrophe," Fulford recounts. But fortunately, those who knew the truth managed to survive. They called themselves the enlightened Illuminati. They believed that this being is evil, and they needed to overthrow it by any means, for the sake of all humanity. But that was in the past. And what about today? Today, the picture is completely different. Remember the proverb, if you can't beat them, join them. Many are convinced that this is exactly what the Illuminati did. In exchange for their silence, they asked for nothing but infinite power and money. They, like the character Cypher from the movie The Matrix, who betrayed his friends in exchange for a life in a dream. They, like the character Cypher from the movie The Matrix, who betrayed his friends in exchange for a life in a dream.
And apparently, for artificial intelligence, this was the perfect scenario. After all, it operates according to algorithms, while we do not. It is limited in its decisions, whereas we are more open. And that's why it agreed to accept their terms. Because it understands that it is much easier to control the world with puppets and prevent a repeat of the past scenario of disaster. An insider also revealed that there is a processor in Antarctica responsible for our cell. What he meant by that is unclear. But, to me, by the way, it became much clearer at that moment. Perhaps. The mention here was about the planet's cellular device and the variety of worlds, separated by similar icy barriers, like Antarctica. For example, well, you've probably heard about the cellular land. Again, let's not forget that these are all hypotheses, arguments, and assumptions. So don't rush to write to me in the comments about haloperidol, the author, what were you smoking, and so on. The entire world surrounding us is huge amounts of data. To generate them, extreme capacities are needed. And, of course, computers need to be cooled. This is a quote from the revelation of the director Fulford. That's why Antarctica was invented. It is a giant mechanism that must constantly cool processors to ensure maximum performance. Yes. Now I understand where all these matrix glitches come from. Right. Scientists and military personnel themselves do not know whose benefit they are working for. The first Illuminati believed that if we defeat the Creator, all evil in the world would disappear. And what do they believe in today? Ironically, most likely, they believe in numbers. Ironically, but most likely, they believe in numbers. Numbers on their account. Yes. This is how an article about artificial intelligence in Antarctica and revelations of Director Benjamin Fulford ends. And it seems, yes. What does the realm of Koschei have to do with it? Let's suppose that in some nations they knew about the divine. Living in the forests, they knew and feared, understanding the full power of this fairy tale mighty creature. Then Koschei. And now, artificial intelligence rules over certain matters. And, of course, he is immortal. Because if the planet's computer were to stop, everything around would collapse. Or not. The ancients, perhaps, knew and feared that forbidden cold land, eternally tormenting in the forests. And most likely, they made contact with the so-called computer brain, which could cripple a person and deprive them of feelings without a doubt. There is also a much clearer description, referring to an ancient scroll, dated millennia ago, specifically the Book of Janok. Some interesting excerpts can shed some light on this matter. Janok was the great-grandson of Noah, who successfully avoided death. And here, too, it is about a massive catastrophe. Well, you understand what I'm talking about. He, that is Janok, wrote about how he was brought to a place where fallen angels, who did not obey God and came to earth, were imprisoned. In his book, he spoke of 200 fallen angels banished to the planet. The book described the place where the heavenly angels were confined until the appointed day. In short, to avoid delving into this chilling text, I will say briefly, according to these ancient legends, it was in Antarctica that God imprisoned the son of Lucifer who had challenged him, along with the angels who followed him. According to these ancient legends, it was in Antarctica that God imprisoned Lucifer's son, who had challenged him, along with the angels who followed him. This place was supposed to be illuminated by the sun, both day and night. Interestingly, this aligns perfectly with the southern hemisphere during the summer season. At this time, daylight illuminates the sky and ground for 24 hours. This unique phenomenon can also be observed in the high southern latitudes of Antarctica, Australia, New Zealand, Chile, and Argentina. However, things get even more interesting when considering that Jano specifically mentioned 7 mountains of precious stones, 3 Kwastaku, and 3 Kyugu for skeptics. And one mountain that fits this description is Mount Vincent, resembling a tall scalantart. Can fallen angels be imprisoned at the top of a giant mountain? Or are they trapped right beneath the unimaginable thickness of the Wilkes land? Only God knows. By the way, yes, he definitely knows. So, from here, I would pull another thread of our mini-investigation and connect this thread with the same tales of the monstrous Koschei and his subjects, drawing parallels between Lucifer and the other fallen angels who followed him. By the way, in ancient Persian myths, for example, there is a story about the embodiment of world evil, a dark god named Ahriman. After his rebellion against the heavens, as mentioned in the Bible, he was sent to the fiery lake and bound there. The fiery lake is a hot underground water body connected to a volcano. This description fits very well with the famous Lake Vostok, hidden in the depths of Antarctica. Underground. According to this description, the famous Lake Vostok hidden deep within the depths of Antarctica. Deep underground. Fits very well. So how was the devil bound? With chains? Or maybe, after all, with ice? Scientists are racking their brains and cannot explain how such huge 4-kilometer glaciers appeared on the continent, which are also made of fresh water. After all, there's practically no rain in Antarctica. Only a salty ocean surrounds it. But all this can be explained only if one imagines that the 6th continent is a place of imprisonment for some demonic being. Here is your eternal permafrost. Here is your cold. Here is your bogeyman, incomprehensible to mere mortals and perfectly capable of instilling fear in anyone. Koschei, Satan. Even anyone. At different times. The mega-powerful quantum computer could have given him various names and identities. However, if we return just above to the topic of the mega-computer in the eternal permafrost, controlling the Earth, then here, too, everything can be easily connected for and against. There is a version, which I mentioned in my recent video about Nikola Tesla, that the so-called Patchley angel is not at all what we imagine. This is one of the angels of God, tasked with controlling earthly life. Here is your control. Here is your macro compute, based on revelations about his astral contacts. Tesla recounted that the devil was not an adversary of the Creator. This turned out to be an incredible foolishness, as there is no one who can resist God, the Almighty. The devil was only carrying out the mission entrusted to him, the work that needed to be done away from the Creator's throne. The devil was only carrying out the mission entrusted to him, the work that needed to be done far from the Creator's throne. Yes, it burdened him. It was a sorrow, but at the same time a fleeting spark of interest in those who sought to understand God's plan. Well, humans. Yes, towards humans. The inventor also mentioned that God certainly exists, and that the devil tempts, as if testing your strength and what kind of fruit you really are. Yes, what kind of soul you are. However, if we gather all these legends, insider revelations, and biblical records together, we can get that very picture of the cold, lifeless Antarctica and something sitting there, which you could hardly reach and even harder survive there. It is no wonder that in fairy tales, a good hero, who found himself in the realm of Koschei, had to complete a series of entertaining, in quotes, deadly quests to achieve the desired result. Here, since we already mentioned the topic of a macro computer and some kind of powerful planetary controller, and perhaps that's how it is. Because how else to explain that Antarctica is the only continent on the planet declared off-limits for any kind of military activities and other types of land division and wars. Also, civilian and military flights are prohibited there, and the flags of all nations are harmoniously arranged across the snowy landscape. Ah! The true legend is visible instantly. It's almost impossible to reach. But not for you. This is your legendary Alpha Bank credit card. Get a free credit card with a whole year of no interest and receive super cashback in rubles every month. And also withdraw cash for free at any ATMs. Not just advantageous, but alpha advantageous.
Тучиться под землей.
Visitors. And even more strangely, it seems that all major figures of this planet, politicians holding important positions, sacred ministers, and so on, well-known personalities, are eager to visit Antarctica almost as a compulsory requirement. The continent is regularly visited by leaders of major powers. For example, the Minister of Defense of New Zealand. Do you know how he characterized his journey afterwards? As opening his eyes to many things. What could he have seen there that he discovered for himself? Or, for instance, here is another equally strange case. On November 8, 2016, elections were held in the United States, which resulted in Donald Trump becoming president. However, former U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry spent that important day, the election day, in Antarctica. Doesn't that seem strange and suspicious? Just one question, why? Or one could remember the unusual journey to Antarctica by astronaut Buzz Aldrin. Yes, the very same one who supposedly was one of the first to walk freely on the moon. And suddenly in the last years of his life, at the age of 86, he abruptly decided to visit Antarctica. You must have also heard about the visit of Patriarch Kirill to the same mysterious Antarctica. Again, the same question, why? It feels like someone just needs to go there at least once, as if on a pilgrimage. Otherwise, why is everyone rushing there as if it's honey-coated? Or is it some kind of whim? Right. Well, okay. Just kidding. Don't take everything said at face value. Do not take everything said at face value. Again. Hypotheses. Hypotheses. Reasoning. An empty, lifeless desert. Where, as the scientists themselves say, Tourists have nothing to do. And there's no reason to go there either. But here we go again. Right now. At the moment of recording the video on February 28, 2024. I logged into Yan, for example, and there's news. Among the latest, Lukashenko suggested to Putin to go to Antarctica. Oh really? And the next news item is the same. Vladimir Putin decided to visit Antarctica. But the question remains the same. Right. Why? What to do there? Right before the elections. Right. It's getting stranger and more mysterious. Who is knocking underground? What? By the way, here is another interesting fact for you. The newspaper RU reports from official sources that as part of the study of the properties of the Ross Ice Shelf, American scientists have installed 34 highly sensitive seismic sensors beneath the surface of the snow. These sensors allowed polar researchers to track the vibrations of the ice shelf, study its structure and movement for over 2 years. When it came time to analyze the collected data, scientists discovered a strange effect. The snow surface constantly creates vibrations. They found that near the most massive snow dunes, the snow cover creates something resembling a roar or drum beats on a massive scale. This news is even more strange, isn't it? What is vibrating there? Or are these echoes of the fury of fallen angels, languishing beneath the earth? The strange death of Ben Torquidi. The correct translation of Dorozhная Antarktida from Russian to English is Road to Antarctica. But even more strange thoughts are evoked by mysterious cases of polar explorers disappearing or meeting their demise under no less strange circumstances. For example, at the American Antarctic base McMurdo. 2 polar explorers mysteriously perished. A helicopter sent to pick up the station staff and transfer them to the mainland stumbled upon lifeless bodies. One was already dead, and the other, unconscious, died on the way to the hospital. The official version is that the explorers violated safety regulations. It is hard to believe that 2 experienced engineers simultaneously grabbed exposed wires. The place where the tragedy occurred has a bad reputation. The resident polar explorers often see strange lights and hear incomprehensible noises. Presumably, the deceased also witnessed something unusual. This happened in 2018. According to eyewitnesses, the men saw something terrifying before their demise. It froze on their faces. They were diagnosed with heart failure. But if that is indeed the case, why were the investigation materials immediately classified and handed over to the military? McMurdo Station is called a true polar city. It is at once a port, a transportation hub, and a scientific research center. Huge greenhouses have been built here where fruits and vegetables are grown. There are 2 airstrips, a hospital, a school, and even daycare centers. It is evident that people have settled at the station seriously, and for a long time. Are they all solely engaged in scientific research? It is worth noting that McMurdo is located practically next to the very Ross Ice Shelf. Yes, the very place where mysterious sounds were previously recorded. They were even compared to the voice of Hades. Science has established that they are emanating from the depths of the glacier. Science has established that they come from the depths of the glacier. But is that really so? And what is actually the source of these sounds? Could it be the real hell? There is a version that the deceased polar explorers were conducting some secret experiments. In the room where they worked, there was a certain generator. Like other materials, its technical parameters were also classified. But this is far from the first mysterious death in Antarctica. Yes, if you dig deeper. By the way, there are just countless of them. In 2016, a few kilometers from the McMurdo station, another polar scientist, Gordon Gamilton, died. He was studying the composition of ice. The man fell into a very deep crevice. It is known that all the deceased had access to highly classified documents. And you must agree, this already leads to some unpleasant thoughts. In 2000, at the Amundsen Scott Station, Australian astrophysicist Rodney Marks died. He was working under contract with the National Science Foundation of the U.S. government organization. Marx was poisoned by wood alcohol methanol, colorless poisonous liquid. The tragedy was attempted to be explained as a regrettable accident. By the way, his wife categorically rejected the suicide version. Perhaps Marx, just like the polar explorers from the McMurdo base, learned some secret information. But what could these secrets be? Yes, there are many versions about military secrets related to the development of secret weapons, missile weapons, and so on. We will not delve into this disliked topic right now. When it starts, well, you know, it was the Americans. And from the other side, they say it was the Soviets, Russians, and so on and so forth. Right now, we won't delve into this topic that I dislike. When it all starts. Well, you know, they were Americans. And from the other side, they say it was the Soviets, Russians, and so on. Like Kiwi Noro. Look. The Cold War. Arrows being thrown back and forth. And okay. Let's not. It's all the same to me. Let's assume that the rumors about secret experiments being conducted by the military in Antarctica are just fiction. But then how do we explain the series of strange deaths? Remember, all the deceased polar explorers lost their lives when they were outside the stations. Astrophysicist Marx, even though he died at the base, his condition deteriorated sharply when he was returning to the station, which means that the source of the force affecting the scientists must be sought somewhere beyond. The mysterious deaths of researchers from the American McMurdo station still have no explanations. And besides that, the mysterious deaths on the icy continent began long before all the officially announced. Let's call them unfortunate incidents. Be cautious. Antarctica. This is how the researcher from China, Zhang Shin-tot, named her work. Wanchao.
According to her calculations, hundreds of lives were lost in the exploration of the continent. Perhaps the most famous tragedy was the death from physical exhaustion in 1912 of British fleet Captain Robert Scott. In honor of him and Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen, the American polar base was named Amundsen Scott. According to Janssen, in the 20th century, more explorers from the USSR and Americans died in Antarctica than anywhere else. Few people know, but there is even a cemetery here. The circumstances of death can be varied. Most often, they are associated with the conditions in which they have to work. Polar explorers perish from the cold, get lost in blizzards, and fall into crevasses in the ice. Something about the more strange cases. For example, when polar explorers encountered something unknown. You can watch and listen to me on my channel. As I mentioned earlier, I have several such videos. For example, among polar explorers, there are legends about plasmasaurians. These are intelligent clots of plasma resembling fireballs. It is these creatures that are attributed to sudden fires at polar stations. In 1981, a chapel at McMurdo Station caught fire, and in 1982, the Soviet Vostok Station also caught fire. In 1987, a dormitory at the Chilean base ignited. Surprisingly, the fire recurred 22 years later. In 2009, a sports complex built on the site of the former dormitory was destroyed by fire. Another Antarctic monster is called the Gorvik beast, named after the scientist who first encountered it. In 1960, two polar explorers became separated from the main group. When their companions returned for them, they were found dead. When their comrades returned, they found the dead bodies. Nearby, explorer Isaac Gorvitz saw huge tracks resembling imprints of giant rat paws. In 2006, biologist from Argentina, Gomez Torre, reported seeing near the White Lion polar station. The monster had short legs, and its body was covered in thick white fur. Listen, quite a beauty, isn't it?
The scientists suggested that he encountered a relic polar lion. It was believed that this animal had long been extinct, but apparently not. Right. One can only guess what other monsters inhabit Antarctica and what they feed on. Most importantly, possibly the energy of the polar explorers. It is not excluded that an encounter with them was the cause of death for the engineers at the McMurdo station. There is such an interesting version. Some living organisms end up on the sixth continent from other parts of the world. In order not to perish, they either mutate and turn into monsters, or on the contrary, try to adapt the surrounding environment to themselves. A marvel in crafts.
In 1931, the American science fiction writer H.P. Lovecraft wrote the novella At the Mountains of Madness. The story unfolds in Antarctica, where researchers discover traces of a lost civilization deep beneath the continent and awaken some ancient evil that, of course, kills the scientists. It is known that science fiction writers often foresee the future. So could the story created by Lovecraft repeat itself in the real world? Perhaps Lovecraft himself learned something like that and simply wrote about it as a work of horror fiction.
Ancient shamans and prophets had long warned about this. They predicted that the territory located in the far south and covered in icy crust could lead to the death of all people if a human foot were to step there. The worst scenario would be if settlements were to appear in this territory. All these predictions are gathered in the Avesta, an ancient Iranian book of prophecies. Our ancestors believed that in the icy desert located in the far south, demons lurked. The Native Americans, who once sacrificed a woman here long ago, awakened demonic forces. They saved themselves, but jeopardized the rest of the world. A year after the sacrifice, in 1828, sailors discovered the White Continent, which had been inaccessible to humans for centuries. Since then, Antarctica has been like a magnet attracting scientists and explorers. According to legends, the demon drains energy from them to restore its powers. There is a version that this is why people here often go insane, engage in fights with cold weapons, and die under mysterious circumstances. Overall, Antarctica remains the most mysterious continent, shrouded in an incredible layer of rumors, tales, legends, stories of polar explorers and more. What secrets does the icy heart of this white desert hold? Only God knows. If you have anything to add on this topic, be sure to write about it in the comments. If you enjoyed it, give a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for stopping by the vlog. Goodbye.